I left the cemetery with the scent of lilies on my sleeves and walked into the house that taught me to be good. I only meant to say my husband left me 3 things, yet, as I spoke, I realized they already knew. They had prepared a script to declare me incompetent. Keep your eyes on the paperwork because that's where the knife is. You will soon understand that true revenge is just making sure they can never touch you again. My name is Mila Coleman, and right now, I am standing in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway of the county courthouse. The air in this building always smells of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and quiet desperation. My spine is straight, rigid against the cold plaster wall behind me, in my right hand. My fingers tightly grip a small, silver USB drive. Its metal casing bites into my palm, a sharp reminder of the digital truth it holds. Under my left arm, a thick stack of printed papers rests heavily against my ribs. These pages are not just documents. They are the armor I had to forge in the darkest hours of my life. Down the long corridor of courtroom number 4 swing open, a bailiff steps out into the hallway. His voice booms over the low, anxious murmur of lawyers and pacing families. He calls out a name. It is my mother's name. I watch Janine Mercer rise from a wooden bench 20 feet away from me. She carefully smooths down the front of her tailored black skirt, checking her reflection in the dark glass of the courtroom door. She looks the part perfectly. She is playing the grieving, deeply concerned matriarch, burdened by the tragic mental decline of her eldest daughter, looking at her perfectly coiffed hair and her practiced expression of sorrow. A bitter taste rises in the back of my throat. I had asked them for only one thing in my entire adult life, just one single act of grace. I asked them to attend my husband's funeral. I asked them to stand with me while I lowered Evan into the freezing earth. They did not show up. They told me they could not bear the emotional toll, that they could not spare 2 hours of their weekend to support me. But today, under the harsh glare of institutional lighting, they showed up to a courthouse. They showed up for the money. Inside the courtroom, the scene unfolds with a sickening, practiced efficiency. The room is a blur of polished mahogany, and the dry rustle of legal documents being shuffled. A court clerk, a woman with exhausted eyes and a tight bun, pushes a thick manila folder across the heavy wooden table toward the judge. It is a petition for emergency temporary guardianship. My lawyer leans over, allowing me to see the document. I stare at the bottom of the final page. There is a signature resting on the line, looping and frantic, masquerading as mine. It is a forged surrender of my own mind, a fabricated consent to let them take over my finances, my medical decisions, my entire existence. I turn my head slowly, letting my gaze slide past the clerk, past the imposing wooden bench of the judge, to rest squarely on my younger sister. Sloane is sitting in the gallery, right behind our mother. When our eyes finally meet, the mask slips for a fraction of a second. I see the raw, animal panic flashing in her dilated pupils. She knows I see the lie. Yet, true to form and trained by decades of our mother's direction, Sloane immediately drops her chin. Her eyes well up with manufactured tears. She desperately clings to the role she was assigned. She is playing the terrified, victimized sibling who is just trying to save her poor, unhinged sister from self-destruction. It all started with 3 sealed envelopes my husband left behind and a warning I heard far too late. Evan was a brilliant man. He was a man who understood the long, dark shadows that people cast, especially the people who loudly claimed to love you. He saw the cracks in my family's facade long before I was willing to acknowledge them. He knew what they would do the moment his heart stopped beating, and he built a fortress out of paper and ink to protect me when he no longer could. I have to ask you something, and I want you to think about the answer carefully. Have you ever had your own family paint you as unstable just to legalize stealing your life? Have you ever watched the people who raised you, the people who were supposed to protect you from the monsters in the dark, twist your profound grief into a psychiatric diagnosis? Have you ever seen them use your lowest, most devastating moments of mourning as a stepladder to reach your bank accounts? It is a very specific, quiet kind of violence. It leaves no physical bruises for the police to photograph. It breaks no bones. It just quietly, methodically erases you from your own existence, replacing you with a legal guardian who holds the keys to your cage. To understand how we ended up in this freezing courtroom, breathing in the sterile air of legal warfare, we have to rewind the clock. We have to go back to the beginning of this nightmare. 2 days ago, I came back from the funeral. 2 days ago, my world was nothing but a hollow ache in my chest and the deafening, suffocating silence of an empty house in the suburbs. I was wearing a black dress that smelled of damp earth and funeral lilies. I was entirely alone. That was the exact moment I found what Evan had prepared for this inevitability. He had hidden them carefully in the false bottom of his desk drawer. 3 envelopes, crisp, white, and heavy with the weight of absolute truth. The first envelope was addressed to me, filled with a love so fierce it broke me in half all over again, and a set of instructions that sounded like a battle plan. The second envelope contained a digital nightmare, a web of correspondence I was never meant to see. But it was the third envelope that set this entire ruthless machine into motion. The third envelope had my mother's name written across the front in Evan's precise, slanted handwriting. That single piece of paper, sitting quietly on my dining room table, was the reason they were panicking right now. That was the reason they had scrambled to hire a ruthless attorney over the weekend. That was the reason they rushed to a judge first thing on a Monday morning, desperate to lock me in a cage of legal incompetence before I could open it and expose the rot underneath our family tree. They thought my grief had made me weak. They thought the tears I shed for my husband had washed away my ability to fight back. They were wrong. I watch my mother stand before the judge, playing the part of the savior, and I feel nothing but a cold, hard clarity. I adjust my grip on the silver USB drive. I am not here to defend myself against their fabricated claims of insanity. I did not come to this courthouse to beg for their pity or to ask for my freedom. I came to say you no longer have the right to step into my life. The wind sweeping across the suburban St. Louis, Missouri cemetery carried a biting, late autumn chill that sliced right through the thin wool of my black coat. I stood motionless beside the open earth, watching the groundskeepers discreetly wait by their heavy equipment. Arranged on the manicured grass were 20 green velvet folding chairs. Exactly 16 of them sat entirely empty. The hollow space they occupied screamed louder than any eulogy could ever manage. Occupying the 4 taken seats were 2 of Evan's colleagues from his engineering firm, looking deeply uncomfortable in their stiff, dark suits, and 1 old friend from my college days who had driven 4 hours just to hold my hand for 10 minutes. I kept my eyes fixed on the wrought iron entrance gates at the bottom of the rolling hill. I waited. The service had been scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. By 11:15, the silence was deafening. My phone rested like a dead weight in the pocket of my coat. Not a single ring, not a single vibration. In the exact moment my universe had violently collapsed. The people whose blood ran in my veins had simply opted out of being present. I pulled my phone out with numb fingers and dialed my mother. The line rang 3 times before Janine Mercer answered. There was no background noise, no hushed tones of a car ride, or the rustle of a hurried coat being put on. She was clearly sitting comfortably in her pristine living room. "Mila, darling," she said. Her voice was perfectly modulated, carrying that polite, measured tone she usually reserved for speaking to bank tellers or country club receptionists. "The service ended 20 minutes ago," I said, my voice barely more than a dry whisper. A soft, theatrical sigh came through the receiver. "We thought it best not to intrude. Sweetheart, you know how chaotic these things can get, and your father's blood pressure simply cannot handle a scene today. We did not want to bring any unnecessary noise to Evan's day. You have always been so incredibly strong. You handle things so well on your own." I closed my eyes. There it was, the classic Janine Mercer maneuver. She wrapped her absence in a compliment, framing her abandonment as a testament to my resilience. Before I could formulate a response, the call clicked dead. A second later, the screen lit up with a text message from my younger sister. "Sloan, I stared at the harsh blue light of the screen. Done yet, talk later. That was it. 34 letters and punctuation marks. She asked about the burial of my husband of 7 years, with the exact same casual detachment one might use to ask if a routine dentist appointment had finally wrapped up. A sharp, hot wave of grief rose in my chest, threatening to crack my ribs, but I instantly locked my jaw. I forced the tears back down until my throat burned and my entire body went rigid. I made a silent vow over the freshly turned soil. I would not let them see me break. I could not afford to shed a single tear in their presence. I knew their playbook entirely too well. In my family, sadness was never treated as a normal human emotion. It was categorized as a dangerous symptom. Every time I had ever cried in my teenage years or my 20s, they had weaponized it, using my tears as undeniable proof that I was unstable, overly emotional, or incapable of rational thought. I would not give them that ammunition today. An hour later, I was sitting on a worn leather sofa in an apartment across the city. Tessa Klein handed me a mug of black tea, her sharp eyes scanning my face. Tessa was an investigative content producer, running a widely successful true crime and legal malpractice podcast out of her spare bedroom. She possessed a mind like a steel trap and a total intolerance for theatrical nonsense. When I had arrived at her door, shivering and hollow, she had not bombarded me with empty platitudes or aggressive sympathy. She simply grabbed my arm, pulled me inside the warm apartment, locked the deadbolt, and looked me dead in the eye. "Nobody acts here, Mila," Tessa had said, pointing to the sofa. "You do not have to hold up the ceiling in this room." I gripped the warm ceramic mug with both hands, staring down into the dark liquid. "Do you want to know the absolute worst part, Tess?" I asked, my voice finally cracking under the heavy, suffocating weight of the day. "It is not just that Evan is gone. The deepest cut is realizing the truth I've been aggressively avoiding for 32 years. I have always been entirely alone in that family. They did not just fail to show up today, they have never shown up. I was just a prop in their perfect suburban play." Tessa sat down on the wooden coffee table opposite me, leaning forward with her elbows resting on her knees. Her investigative instincts were already humming, picking apart the narrative threads of my afternoon. She tapped her index finger thoughtfully against her chin. "Something is offbeat here," Tessa said, her brow furrowing deeply. "Janine usually likes to play the martyr in public. A funeral is prime real estate for her to show off a dark mourning outfit and collect sympathy points from the neighbors. Skipping it entirely, then telling you how strong you are. She is laying groundwork. She is being unusually sweet, and your mother is only sweet when she is actively leading you toward a trapdoor." I wanted to tell Tessa she was overthinking it, that my parents and sister were just selfish and emotionally bankrupt, but before I could speak, my phone lit up again on the cushion next to me. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. Tessa nodded toward the phone, gesturing for me to answer. I hit accept and put it on speaker so we could both hear. "Mila, honey, I have been talking to your father." Janine's voice floated into the quiet apartment, pouring like warm syrup over the tiny speakerphone. "We feel terrible about you being all alone in that big, quiet house tonight. It is just not safe or healthy for your state of mind. Pack a bag. We want you to come stay in your old room for a few weeks, just temporarily, to help you manage things. We do not want you to be lonely." I stared at Tessa. Her eyes widened slightly in dark recognition. The tone of my mother's voice was too smooth, too rehearsed, and completely devoid of the sharp, critical edges she usually possessed. It was the careful, coaxing voice of a spider inviting a fly to step out of the rain. A profound, icy shiver violently raced down my spine, freezing the blood in my veins. The trapdoor had just been opened. The morning sun felt excessively bright and offensive as I pushed through the heavy, frosted glass doors of Breyer and Holt Legal. I had slept exactly 0 hours the night before, my mind a spinning top of grief and paranoia. I had arrived at the downtown firm expecting a mundane, deeply depressing hour of signing standard death certificates, closing out joint checking accounts, and perhaps discussing a small life insurance policy. The receptionist, a quiet woman with sympathetic eyes, immediately led me down a long hallway and into a massive corner office overlooking the gray concrete of the city below. Caleb Rourke, Evan's estate attorney, was waiting for me. He was a man in his late 50s with incredibly sharp, observant eyes and a rigid posture that left absolutely no room for polite small talk. He did not offer me a condescending smile or a generic platitude about time healing all wounds. He simply gestured to the heavy, dark leather chair positioned directly across from his polished mahogany desk. "Mila, I am profoundly sorry for your loss," Caleb began, his voice flat but carrying a weight of genuine sincerity. He folded his large hands over a thick, cream-colored manila folder, resting in the center of his blotter. Evan was an exceptional man, and he was exceptionally thorough. He updated his primary will exactly 6 months ago. He transferred full ownership of his private equity shares, the commercial real estate holding company, and the offshore trust directly and solely to you. You are the absolute sole beneficiary of his entire estate. I blinked, the words washing over me without fully sinking in. I did not care about the money. I just wanted my husband back. However, Caleb continued, leaning slightly closer, we are not here today to discuss the liquid assets or the real estate portfolios. We are here because of what else he left in my permanent custody. Caleb slowly opened the thick folder. With deliberate precision, he slid 3 heavy, tightly sealed envelopes across the smooth wood until they stopped right at the edge of the desk, mere inches from my trembling hands. My breath caught sharply in the back of my throat. I recognized the stationery immediately. I reached out and picked up the first envelope. It had my name written across the front in Evan's familiar, slanted, hurried handwriting. My fingers shook violently as I broke the thick red wax seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. My dearest Mila, the letter began. I am so incredibly sorry for hiding these things from you. I had to keep you completely in the dark to protect you from the people who share your blood. Please, I beg you, do not sign a single piece of paper while you are in shock. They will use your profound grief as a weapon against you. They will try to take advantage of your physical and mental exhaustion to blindside you. The dark blue ink was pressed so deeply into the paper that I could feel the ridges on the back of the page. He wrote it with a clenched jaw and a racing heart. He knew. He had known exactly what my mother, my father, and my sister would do the very second his heart stopped beating. I carefully set the letter down, wiping a single, hot tear from my cheek, and reached for the second envelope. It was significantly heavier than the first. Tearing the thick paper open, a small silver USB drive spilled out onto the desk, clattering loudly against the wood, followed by a thick stapled stack of printed emails. I picked up the top page. The sender was an email address I recognized instantly. It belonged to a private wealth manager who had played golf with my father for 20 years. The subject line was typed in cold, clinical letters. Contingency planning regarding Mila's capacity and beneficiary adjustments. My stomach plummeted straight into the floor. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I scanned the dense paragraphs. The emails detailed a systematic, calculated inquiry into how my family could successfully gain legal conservatorship over my entire estate if Evan were to unexpectedly pass away. They had been actively probing his legal defenses while he was still alive and breathing. They were testing the fences, looking for a weak spot where they could break in. Declare me legally unfit to manage my own life and seize total control of the assets. They spoke about my emotional state like it was a commodity to be traded. My hands balled into fists as I reached for the third envelope. This one felt different. It felt like a solid iron shield. I tore it open to find a comprehensive, legally binding protection plan. It was a meticulously drafted fortress made of legal clauses and stipulations. Evan had compiled a strict, verified contact list containing Caleb's direct cell phone number, a forensic accountant, and an independent notary public. Highlighted in blindingly bright yellow was a specific, ironclad clause attached to the primary trust document. It explicitly stated that if any blood relative attempted to file an emergency guardianship petition citing mental instability, grief, or incapacity, with the suspected underlying motive of financial control, the entire trust would automatically trigger a lockdown. All temporary access, even my own, would be instantly frozen and transferred to an independent, state-appointed fiduciary until a formal financial crimes investigation. I sat back hard against the leather chair, staring at the scattered, damning papers. My dead husband had anticipated their exact angle of attack with terrifying accuracy. He knew they would not come at me with raised voices, physical threats, or broken glass. They would come with clipboards and polite concerns. They would come with sympathetic smiles, warm hugs, and dense legal jargon. They planned to steal my entire existence, not by physical force, but by drowning me in fraudulent paperwork. Caleb leaned forward, breaking the heavy, suffocating silence in the office. "Mila, you need to understand the extreme urgency of this situation," he warned, his tone grave and urgent. "Assets of this magnitude cannot be hidden in the dark for long. The probate courts are a matter of public record. Within 48 hours, the news of these massive transfers will leak through standard tax procedures. The custodial banks and brokerage firms will kick out automated alerts. The notary records will become entirely visible to anyone looking. The exact second your mother catches wind of the actual dollar amount sitting in that trust, their timeline will accelerate aggressively. They will strike, right on cue, as if summoned by the very mention of their relentless greed." My cell phone vibrated violently against the armrest of my chair. The sudden noise made me jump. I glanced down at the illuminated screen. It was a brand new text message from my mother. "Come home for dinner tonight." The crisp text message read, "The whole family is gathering at the house. We need to sit down together and discuss your future. We just want to help you figure things out so you do not have to worry." I stared at the glowing white letters until the screen finally timed out and faded to black. A cold, hard reality washed over my entire body, instantly crystallizing my resolve and burning away the last remnants of my naive grief. Tonight was not going to be a comforting, warm family dinner. There would be no hearty casseroles, no shared tears, and no genuine hugs of support. I understood exactly what she was arranging behind closed doors. Tonight was a formal casting call for the elaborate, horrific script they had already finished writing. They were setting the stage to officially declare me broken, and I was expected to walk right through the front door and play the lead role. The drive out to the manicured suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. My parents lived in a sprawling, colonial-style house at the end of a quiet, dead-end street. Walking through the heavy mahogany front door was like stepping directly into a high-end furniture showroom. The air inside always smelled faintly of lemon polish, bleached linen, and artificial vanilla. The white carpet in the vast foyer was so pristine it made you instinctively hold your breath, terrified that merely existing in the space might leave a permanent, unforgivable stain. It was a house completely devoid of genuine warmth, designed exclusively for presentation and social intimidation. My mother, Janine, was waiting in the entryway. As soon as I crossed the threshold, she reached out and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. It was a perfectly calibrated embrace, not too tight to be considered overbearing, and not too brief to seem cold. It lasted for exactly 3 seconds. She patted my upper back twice, pulled away, and offered a soft, deeply rehearsed sigh of maternal concern. If there had been a hidden camera crew filming a documentary about supportive families dealing with sudden tragedy, she would have secured a daytime television award on the spot. Dinner was served in the formal dining room under the harsh glare of a heavy crystal chandelier. The unspoken tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Sloane sat directly across from me, picking at her roasted vegetables while launching a carefully coordinated campaign of psychological warfare. "You look absolutely exhausted." "Mila," Sloane murmured, her brow furrowed in a display of exaggerated, theatrical worry. "Are you even sleeping at all? I noticed you left your car keys in the front door when you arrived. You have been so forgetful lately. And earlier today, you seemed so easily confused and emotional on the phone. It is completely understandable. Given your delicate mental state, but we are all just so incredibly worried about your cognitive health right now. At the head of the long table, my father, Dale, methodically sliced his steak. He did not look up from his plate. He simply offered his standard, lifelong contribution to the family dynamic. "Your sister and mother are right, kiddo," he mumbled, his voice flat and detached. "You need to let us take the wheel for a long while." Right on cue, exactly as the dinner plates were being cleared away, my mother stood up and walked over to the antique wooden sideboard. When she returned to the table, she placed a thick, neatly stapled stack of legal documents directly next to my water glass. "We know you are drowning in sorrow right now, sweetheart," Janine said. Her voice dropped an octave into a soothing, velvety purr that completely hid the razor blades waiting underneath. "This is just a simple, temporary power of attorney. It allows me to help you handle the immediate aftermath, the hospital bills, the funeral expenses, closing out the minor joint accounts. We just want to remove the administrative burden so you can focus entirely on your emotional healing without the crushing stress of fiduciary responsibilities." I stared down at the crisp white pages resting on the mahogany table. The terminology she used was far too polished. Janine Mercer did not casually throw around phrases like administrative burden or fiduciary responsibilities unless she had been explicitly coached. Those specific words had been spoon-fed to her by a very expensive legal professional. I knew exactly what I needed to do in that moment. I had to feed their chosen narrative. I slowly reached out, intentionally letting my fingers tremble violently as they hovered over the top page. I pulled my hand back quickly and pressed my fingertips hard against my temples, squeezing my eyes shut. "I just cannot look at this right now," I whispered, forcing my voice to shake with artificial panic. My brain cannot keep up with any of these big words. The letters are practically swimming on the page. I feel like my head is going to split wide open from the pressure. I peeked through my fingers just in time to catch it. A sudden, electric spark of absolute triumph flashed brightly behind my mother's eyes. It was the distinct thrill of a predator watching its prey willingly step into a steel trap. My feigned weakness completely validated the exact legal argument they were secretly building against me. "That is perfectly fine, darling," Janine cooed, already reaching into her tailored pocket to produce a sleek silver pen. "You do not need to read the tedious details. Your mind is too fragile. Just sign your name at the bottom of the very last page, and I will take care of absolutely everything else." "No," I said softly. I picked up the heavy stack of papers and clutched them tightly to my chest. "I need to lie down in a dark room. I will take these up to my old bedroom and try to read them when the room stops spinning. Maybe tomorrow morning." Janine's polite facade cracked for a fraction of a second. She reached across the table, her manicured fingers grazing the edge of the documents, desperate to keep them on the ground floor. "Mila, please leave them down here. They might get lost or spilled on upstairs. You are in absolutely no condition to be managing important legal paperwork right now." "I just want to hold on to them," I replied, playing the part of a confused, stubborn child, clinging to a blanket. I stood up quickly, completely ignoring her outstretched hand, and walked straight up the curved oak staircase. I could feel the intense heat of their collective glare burning into my spine with every single step I took. Hours later, the large house plunged into total darkness. The antique grandfather clock in the downstairs hallway chimed 2 times. The silence of the suburbs at 2 o'clock in the morning was heavy and absolute. I slipped out of my childhood bed, leaving my shoes behind, and crept silently down the thickly carpeted hallway. As I passed my father's home office, a faint, rhythmic humming sound caught my immediate attention. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, spilling a thin sliver of pale moonlight onto the hardwood floorboards. I pushed the door open just enough to slip my body inside. The large laser printer sitting on the wooden credenza was still radiating a noticeable amount of heat. A faint, acrid smell of hot toner hung in the stagnant air of the room. I stepped closer. The machine was displaying a glowing red error light on its digital screen. A single sheet of paper was jammed halfway out of the plastic output tray. I held my breath and gently gripped the edge of the exposed paper. I pulled it free from the internal rollers with agonizing slowness to avoid tearing the evidence. Turning around, I held the warm page up to the moonlight filtering through the plantation shutters. My blood instantly turned to ice water. Printed in bold, capitalized black letters across the top margin was a single, devastating heading: Emergency Guardianship Petition Draft. I stood frozen in the dark office, the warm paper trembling violently in my hands. The velvet gloves had completely come off. The polite dinner conversation, the seemingly innocent temporary power of attorney, the sudden influx of maternal concern. It was all a meticulously constructed smokescreen. They did not want to help me navigate my crushing grief. They did not want to ease my heavy burden. They wanted to fundamentally erase my legal existence. They were preparing to declare me entirely incompetent, strip away my bodily and financial autonomy, and replace me as the master of my own life, all neatly legalized by the heavy strike of a judicial stamp. I retreated to the far corner of my childhood bedroom and pulled the heavy patchwork quilt completely over my head to muffle any sound. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed in the pitch black, reading 2 o'clock in the morning. My hands were still shaking from the discovery in my father's office, but my mind was remarkably clear. I dialed Tessa's number. She answered on the very first ring, wide awake and instantly alert. "They are filing for guardianship," I whispered urgently into the receiver, keeping my voice barely above a breath. "Evan left 3 envelopes behind. Envelope number 2 has the undeniable proof. They have been planning this." Tessa inhaled sharply through her teeth. Her investigative producer instincts took over the conversation immediately. "Listen to me very carefully. Mila, do not confront them directly. If you blow up right now, if you yell or accuse them of anything, they will absolutely use your entirely justified anger to prove you are erratic and paranoid. You have to play the long game. You have to let them expose themselves through their own words and actions. Let them feel like they are completely in control." She was entirely right. The only way to dismantle a trap is from the outside, not while you are thrashing blindly around inside it. The next morning, I carefully calibrated my performance. I walked down the curved oak staircase wearing the exact same wrinkled black clothes from the day before. I shuffled my feet slightly against the hardwood. I walked into the kitchen, poured a cup of lukewarm coffee, and stared blankly at the marble backsplash. When my mother breezed into the room, smelling of expensive floral perfume, I asked her what day of the week it was. I let a quiet beat pass, waited exactly 5 minutes, and then asked her the exact same harmless question again. I kept the act incredibly subtle. I did not scream, I did not cry, and I did not throw things. I simply played the part of a woman whose grief had made her comfortably, quietly pliable. I gave them a slight mental fog, careful not to overdo it so I would not actually be medically labeled as detached from reality. Janine took the bait with terrifying speed. By 10 o'clock in the morning, she was pacing the back patio with her cell phone pressed tightly to her ear. She was accelerating the timeline. I stood hidden behind the sheer curtains of the living room and listened as she booked a capacity evaluation for me. She did not call a licensed hospital psychiatrist or a reputable medical facility. She called a private consulting service. They were the kind of hired guns who provided mobile, out-of-pocket assessments, known in certain circles for rubber-stamping diagnoses of incompetence if the family writing the check paid the right premium. Then came the isolation phase, shortly before noon. Sloane cornered me in the narrow hallway leading to the laundry room. She reached out, her hand hovering dangerously close to my jacket pocket where my cell phone rested. "You keep checking your screen, Mila," Sloane murmured softly, her eyes widening with a sickeningly fake display of sisterly sympathy. "You are just torturing yourself looking at old messages. Let me hold your phone for a few days to reduce your stress. You do not need the outside world overwhelming you right now. Just unplug, and let us take care of everything." I recognized the tactic instantly. It was the crucial first step in any successful hostage situation. Cut off the victim's line of communication, and they become completely dependent on their captors. I pulled back just enough to keep the device out of her reach, offering a vague, dismissive nod while muttering that I needed to keep it in case Evan's office called about his desk belongings. The moment the house emptied out for a brief grocery run, I went straight to work. I slipped back into my father's study. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs as I used my phone camera to photograph every single document I could find on the desk and inside the unlocked drawers. I meticulously captured the timestamps, the sender details, and zoomed in specifically on the email addresses and the forged signatures on the draft petition I had found the night before. I immediately composed a secure, encrypted email to Caleb, attaching the high-resolution scans of the documents from envelope number 3. I hit send and watched the progress bar complete. With that single digital transmission, I activated Evan's fail-safe protection plan. The massive financial trust was now officially and legally locked down before my family's greedy fingers could even brush against the vault door. Later that afternoon, Tessa sent me a secure text message update. She had pulled a massive favor from her professional network and contacted a distant relative who worked at the district attorney's office. Assistant District Attorney Rafael Ibarra was a man who had built a fierce, uncompromising career, hunting down people who exploited the vulnerable. He notoriously despised guardianship fraud and predatory family members. Tessa had briefed him on my situation. Rafael advised that we needed rock-solid, undeniable proof of their financial motives and fraudulent methods. But he was now officially watching our case. Sitting alone on the edge of my childhood mattress, I established my absolute, non-negotiable boundaries for survival. First, I would not sign a single piece of paper, no matter how insignificant or routine it looked. Second, I would not consume any food or drink that was prepared specifically for me or handed to me directly by my mother or sister, in a house where everyone was trying to prove I was unstable. Slipping an over-the-counter sleeping pill into my tea to make me groggy for an evaluation was not out of the question. Finally, I would always keep my car keys securely tucked inside my shoe, and I would ensure I had a clear, unobstructed path to the front door at all times. I stared at my pale reflection in the dark window pane. My eyes were completely dry now. The paralyzing shock of losing my husband had finally burned away, leaving behind a cold, calculating machinery in its wake. I made my final decision. I would give them exactly what they desperately wanted. I would let them truly believe I was collapsing under the crushing weight of my own sorrow. I would let them think I was utterly defeated, right up until the exact second they walked blindly into their own snare. Suspicion does not hold up in a court of law, Assistant District Attorney Rafael Ibarra told me. His voice was a calm, steady anchor coming through the encrypted audio channel Tessa had set up on her laptop. We were sitting in the back corner of a noisy, crowded coffee shop, using the ambient noise as a shield. I believe you, Mila, but belief is absolutely useless to a judge. I need concrete, irrefutable proof of their malicious intent and their fraudulent methods. I need hard evidence of forged signatures, forced coercion, or blatant perjury. Tessa reached into her deep canvas tote bag and slid a small, matte black object across the scratched wooden table. It was a digital audio recorder, barely larger than a standard tube of lip balm. Missouri is a one-party consent state, Tessa explained, tapping her fingernail against the device. Caleb already signed off on this strategy. You are doing this entirely by the book, strictly under legal counsel. As long as you are an active participant in the conversation, you can legally record every single word they say in that house. Keep it in your pocket. Keep it running. I wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of the recorder when I returned to my parents' sprawling house. The sterile, perfectly clean walls felt less like a suffocating prison and more like an active hunting ground. I was no longer the helpless, grieving widow they assumed me to be. I was a ghost gathering ammunition. My first piece of tangible, physical evidence materialized the very next afternoon. My mother had carelessly left a printed email chain resting near the edge of the kitchen island, while she took a hurried phone call out on the back patio. I silently glided across the room and slid the paper toward me. The recipient was a shady legal services firm known in local circles for fast-tracking aggressive conservatorships. The second sentence on the page was damning. It read, "If Mila refuses to cooperate peacefully, we will immediately initiate the emergency evaluation option." Beneath that email was a printed calendar confirmation for the capacity evaluation she had discussed the day before. The patient name printed at the top was mine. However, the emergency contact and the primary phone number listed belonged exclusively to my sister, Sloane. They were methodically isolating my medical footprint, ensuring any doctor or evaluator would only hear their carefully fabricated version of my mental state. Later that evening, sitting on the edge of the cold porcelain bathtub with the shower running on full blast to muffle my voice, I called Caleb. I had securely transmitted the high-resolution photographs of the temporary power of attorney my mother had tried to force on me at the dinner table. "It is a devastating trap," Caleb said, his voice tight with profound professional disgust. "It looks completely standard on the first 2 pages, but buried deep in the text of the third appendix is a highly specific, ruinous clause. If you sign this document, you are not just letting her pay funeral expenses or manage minor medical bills. You are granting her total, unmitigated control over Evan's corporate operating accounts. They are attempting to quietly drain the business capital before the trust lock even becomes public knowledge." With Caleb's stark warning ringing in my ears, I began actively using the hidden recorder. I maintained my demeanor of a perfectly fragile, broken woman. I would sit on the living room sofa, staring blankly at the muted television screen, and just let them talk at me. I captured Sloane leaning over my shoulder, whispering in a sickeningly sweet tone, "You are not well, Mila. You need a supervisor to handle your life right now. You are completely lost." I recorded my mother gently stroking my hair while stating, "You simply cannot make any financial decisions right now. Darling, your mind is entirely unstable." The most critical recording, however, came late on a Thursday night. I was standing perfectly still in the dark, carpeted hallway outside the kitchen. My father, who had been a silent, complicit ghost for days, finally showed a tiny sliver of hesitation. "Are we pushing this too fast, Janine?" Dale muttered. The sharp clinking of ice in his whiskey glass echoed off the marble counters. "Are we going too far with this whole guardianship thing? She is still grieving." My mother's response was immediate, sharp, and entirely devoid of any maternal warmth. "Do you want her to ruin everything, Dale? Do you want all of that capital slipping out of the family because she is too weak to manage it? We are securing what rightfully belongs to us." It was the golden ticket. I had captured their pure intent to control and their undeniable financial motive on tape. There was no mention of my physical well-being, only the capital. I relayed the exact transcript to Raphael early the next morning. He was deeply satisfied. "We have enough to lock the door behind them," Raphael said, "but we need them to attempt the actual fraud in front of official witnesses to make the charges stick seamlessly. Let them try to force the notarization. Let them submit the false documents. I will have my investigators waiting." I knew exactly how to spring the trap. I walked downstairs and told my mother, with a trembling voice, that I was finally ready to sign the paperwork, but I insisted we do it at a specific, independent public notary office downtown. I told her I just needed to get out of the house for an hour to breathe. She agreed instantly, eager to close the deal, completely unaware that Raphael had already coordinated with the authorities at that exact location. That night, packing my small overnight bag, I pulled out the contents of the second envelope one last time. I wanted to review the emails Evan had intercepted to calm my racing heart. I traced my index finger down the chain of messages, past my mother's email address, past the shady legal service. Then, my blood ran completely cold. I spotted a name buried in the carbon copy list that I had completely missed during my initial panic. It was the name of my mother's personal wealth advisor. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. This was not just a panicked, opportunistic family grab. This was a highly coordinated, professionally advised financial ambush. and the net was far wider than I had ever imagined. The following afternoon, the suffocating silence of my parents' house was entirely replaced by a cloying, manufactured warmth. Janine had orchestrated a spontaneous family gathering under the explicit guise of communal mourning. 2 aunts, an uncle, and 3 cousins I had not spoken to in over 4 years were suddenly occupying the living room, clutching glasses of cheap wine and plates of heavy casseroles. It was not a wake. It was a carefully staged psychological intervention designed to completely break my spirit through the sheer weight of a crowd. I sat rigidly on the edge of a floral armchair, keeping the digital audio recorder actively running deep inside the pocket of my wool cardigan. I watched the room perform. My sister, Sloane, was methodically making her rounds, acting as the designated narrator of my supposed tragic decline. I tracked her movements as she leaned in close to our aunt. "She barely slept for 2 hours last night," Sloane whispered loudly enough for the sound to carry across the coffee table. She shook her head with a look of profound, manufactured distress. "She has not touched a single bite of solid food in 4 days. It is terrifying to watch her mind just slip away like this. She wanders the hallway at 3 o'clock in the morning talking to herself." Every word was a calculated exaggeration or an outright lie, specifically engineered to transform my natural grief into clinical, undeniable proof of total incapacity. They were actively building a consensus among the extended relatives so that when the legal hammer finally fell, no one would dare question their motives. I decided it was the perfect moment to accelerate their timeline and feed their monstrous ego. I let my shoulders slump forward, stared blankly at the rug, and let a tremor enter my voice. "I am just so overwhelmed," I murmured, ensuring my mother was standing well within earshot. "I cannot even focus on simple tasks. I am honestly not sure I can manage the money or the estate right now." Janine pounced with the lethal speed of a striking viper. She immediately set her wine glass down and crossed the room, kneeling beside my chair to ensure she had the undivided attention of every relative present. She took both of my cold hands in hers, squeezing them with a forceful, bruising grip. "We know, darling," Janine cooed, her voice echoing with artificial maternal salvation. "And we are not going to let you drown, but you have to let us help you formally. We have reached a critical crossroads today. Either you sign the temporary power of attorney this afternoon so I can legally protect your assets, or we will have absolutely no choice but to file an emergency guardianship petition with the state to save you from yourself." It was a brilliantly terrifying false choice, presented publicly to corner me: sign away my rights voluntarily, or have them violently stripped away by a judge. Sitting there under the pitying gaze of my extended family, a chilling realization washed over my entire body. This elaborate performance was not solely about Evan's financial capital. The money was the primary objective, but the secondary prize was the absolute power to dictate my personal history. They wanted to permanently rewrite the narrative of my life, casting me as the fundamentally broken, hysterical woman and elevating themselves to the role of the tragic, self-sacrificing saviors. They wanted to break my dignity just as much as they wanted to break my bank accounts. I kept my expression perfectly fragile. "Okay," I whispered softly, yielding to the pressure. "I will do the private evaluation. I will go talk to the consultant you hired. But I simply cannot do it today. My chest hurts too much, and I feel dizzy. Let us change the appointment to Wednesday afternoon." Janine's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She hated losing momentum, but forcing a physically ill widow into an evaluation in front of an audience of relatives was a bad optic. She reluctantly nodded. Agreeing to the delay, that single concession gave Raphael exactly 48 hours to position his investigators and coordinate the witnesses. Later that evening, long after the heavy front door had closed behind the last departing relative, the residual tension in the house snapped. The 3 of us were standing in the kitchen, the remnants of the fake gathering scattered across the counters. I decided to test the perimeter of their control one final time. "Before we finalize any of the scheduling," I said quietly, leaning against the refrigerator, I think I should just have Caleb look over the documents, just to make sure Evan's current files are properly closed out. The reaction was instantaneous and violently explosive, the mask of the grieving. Supportive mother shattered completely, raining down on the marble floor. Janine slammed her palm flat against the kitchen island. "Absolutely not," she snapped, her voice harsh and echoing with genuine panic. "You will not bring outside lawyers into family business. We are handling this internally. Mila, do you understand me? Caleb Rourke has no jurisdiction over how we protect you." Her sudden, irrational rage over the mere mention of independent legal counsel proved exactly what Tessa and Raphael had suspected. They were utterly terrified of the legal light. They knew their fraudulent paperwork would immediately disintegrate under the scrutiny of a legitimate attorney. In the corner of the kitchen, my father shifted his weight uncomfortably. The sheer volume of my mother's outburst seemed to momentarily pierce his lifelong complicity. "Janine," Dale muttered, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "Are we taking this too far, shouting at her like this?" Janine whipped her head around to glare at him, her eyes practically burning holes through his chest. "This is the only way to keep everything inside the house. Dale, if she goes to that firm, we lose total control of the narrative and the estate. We are doing what is necessary." Sloane, desperate to validate our mother's aggression and shut down our father's hesitation, took a step forward. Her arrogance completely overrode her caution. "Besides," Sloane blurted out, crossing her arms defensively, "you cannot back out now. Mila, the notary is already ready and waiting for us downtown." The kitchen fell into a dead, heavy silence. I stared at my sister, letting her arrogant mistake hang suspended in the cold air between us. She had just publicly admitted that the legal machinery was already fully operational and waiting, entirely contradicting their claim that this was a spontaneous, last-minute effort to help me. They had secured a corrupt or complicit notary long before I ever supposedly agreed to sign a single page. They had built the entire prison before they even asked me to step inside. I did not argue. I did not point out the blatant flaw in their timeline. I simply lowered my head, whispered that I needed to rest, and walked slowly up the darkened staircase. Once I was safely locked inside my bedroom, I pulled my phone out from its hiding place. I opened the encrypted messaging application and typed a single, decisive message to Raphael. "They are taking me to sign, tomorrow." The glass door of the downtown notary office was thick and heavy, sealing out the street noise the moment we stepped inside. The air conditioning was turned up far too high, making the small, beige waiting room feel like a meat locker. I walked in flanked by my mother and my sister, positioned exactly like a prisoner being escorted by her guards. Janine carried a massive, overstuffed leather binder tucked tightly under her arm. The sheer volume of paper inside was staggering, far more than a simple, temporary administrative form would ever require. Sloane trailed closely behind me, playing her designated role of the supportive, concerned sibling ready to catch me if I stumbled. I slid into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs facing the long laminate desk. I intentionally let my shoulders droop, letting out a long, ragged exhale to maintain the illusion of total exhaustion. I glanced through the horizontal blinds of the front window, parked directly across the street. Partially hidden behind a delivery truck was Tessa's dark blue sedan. I could barely make out her silhouette in the driver's seat, but knowing she was out there, serving as my designated witness and anchor to reality, steadied my racing pulse. The notary, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent frown, sat down across from us and adjusted his stamp. He pulled the thick stack of documents from Janine's binder and spread them out across the desk. "I just need to verify a few things," the notary said, his voice a monotone drone. He looked directly at me. "Ma'am, do you fully understand the contents of these documents, and are you signing them of your own free will?" Before I could even open my mouth to draw a breath, Janine leaned in, completely invading my physical space. "She absolutely understands," my mother answered for me, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "She is just incredibly fatigued today. Her husband passed away very recently, and her mind is a little overwhelmed by the legal jargon, but we have discussed everything at length at home. It was a textbook display of coercion, happening right out in the open. She was answering for a supposedly incapacitated adult. I slowly reached out, my fingers intentionally trembling, and pulled the heavy stack of paper an inch closer to me. I started to flip past the signature pages, aiming straight for the dense, single-spaced paragraphs of the appendix. Janine's hand immediately shot out, her manicured fingers clamping down hard over the pages to stop me from turning them. "There is absolutely no need to read all of that. Darling," she said, her smile not reaching her cold eyes. "Those are just standard technicalities, boilerplate language. Do not strain your eyes and give yourself a headache." "I just want to see what I'm agreeing to," I whispered, keeping up the fragile facade. I forcefully slid the paper out from under her grip. I ran my index finger down the middle of the third page, scanning the dense text until I found the glaring inconsistency Caleb had warned me about. But I found something else, something incredibly sloppy. "Why does this paragraph talk about the incapacitated spouse?" I asked, looking up at the notary, then at my mother. I pointed firmly at the sentence. "And who is Michael?" "The document says, in the event of the medical decline of Michael, my husband's name was Evan." The silence in the room dropped below freezing. They had been in such a frantic, greedy rush to assemble the legal cage before the banks notified anyone of the trust transfer that they had purchased a cheap, aggressive legal template online and had not even bothered to proofread the spliced pages. I did not give them a single second to recover. I turned my head slowly to look directly at my sister. "While we are looking at mistakes," I said, my voice dropping the trembling act entirely, "why is your personal cell phone number listed as the sole primary contact on the medical capacity evaluation appointment that was booked for me yesterday morning?" Sloane physically recoiled as if I had been physically violent. The blood completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and terrified. She opened her mouth, but only a pathetic, stammering sound came out. She looked wildly at our mother for a script, but Janine was already losing her grip on the situation. The maternal mask violently tore completely off. Janine slammed her hand flat against the laminate desk, not caring that the notary jumped in his seat. "Are you actively trying to humiliate this family in public?" Janine hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that carried across the quiet room. "After everything we are doing to save you from your own destructive behavior." I sat back in my plastic chair, straightening my spine. I looked her dead in the eye, dropping every single ounce of the weak, grieving widow persona I had worn for the past 4 days. My voice was calm, resonant, and absolutely unwavering. "I am not signing a single page of this," I stated clearly, ensuring the audio recorder in my pocket caught every syllable. "I want my own independent legal counsel to review this entire binder first," Janine snapped. The sheer arrogance of a woman used to total control completely overrode any lingering sense of self-preservation. She leaned over the desk, her face inches from mine, and delivered the fatal blow we had been waiting for. "No," Janine snarled, her eyes burning with pure malice. "You will not call a lawyer. You are going to pick up that pen and sign the papers right now. If you refuse, I swear to you, we will walk straight out of this office and file the emergency petition today. We will have a judge declare you a danger to yourself, and we will lock you away in a facility before the sun goes down." It was perfect. The threat of forced institutionalization used as a direct weapon to extort financial control, spoken out loud in front of an independent witness. Right at that exact second, the heavy glass door of the notary office swung open, the chime echoing loudly in the tense air. Assistant District Attorney Rafael Ibarra strode into the room, wearing a sharp gray suit and an expression of absolute granite. He was flanked by a broad-shouldered investigator, wearing a tactical vest over a plain button-down shirt. Rafael did not hesitate. He walked straight up to the desk, pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket, and placed it directly on top of the fraudulent documents. "Janine Mercer," Raphael said, his voice commanding and authoritative. "I am executing a lawful warrant to immediately seize every document in this room. We are officially opening an investigation into suspected financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery, and criminal coercion." My mother froze, her hand still hovering over the desk. She looked at Raphael, then at the investigator, and a horrific, strained smile stretched across her face. It was the desperate, pathetic reflex of a woman trying to politely charm her way out of a burning building. She tried to laugh, a dry, hollow sound that died instantly in her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but her perfectly manicured hands began to shake violently against the laminate wood. Raphael did not break eye contact. He leaned slightly forward and asked the only question that mattered. "Are you attempting to obtain legal guardianship over your daughter simply to seize control of her husband's financial assets?" Despite the dramatic intervention at the notary office, my mother's sheer, unadulterated arrogance propelled her forward. The emergency petition was filed later that day with the county clerk the previous morning. Once the legal gears were in motion, an expedited preliminary hearing was mandatory. That is how we found ourselves back in the suffocating, wood-paneled confines of courtroom number 4. Janine Mercer took the witness stand wearing a conservative navy blue suit and an expression of profound, agonizing maternal sacrifice. She dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a crumpled tissue, playing the role of the reluctant savior to absolute perfection. "My daughter is completely broken by grief," Janine testified, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic to the untrained ear. "She is entirely sleep-deprived, easily manipulated, and completely detached from reality. If the court does not grant me temporary conservatorship today, she is at immediate risk of total bankruptcy. She is incapable of paying her basic utility bills, let alone managing a complex corporate estate. We are just trying to build a safety net to catch her before she destroys her own life." Sloan was called next as a corroborating witness. She sat rigidly in the heavy wooden chair, twisting a silver ring around her finger to simulate anxiety. "Mila forgets things instantly," Sloan told the judge, shaking her head sadly. "She wanders around the house. She leaves the front door wide open. Her profound sorrow has mutated into a severe pathology. She is a danger to her own well-being." I sat at the respondent's table beside Caleb Rourke. I did not fidget. I did not look down. I kept my posture impeccably straight and my face entirely neutral. Let them build their towering house of cards. When it was our turn, Caleb stood up. He did not raise his voice. He approached the judge's bench with the chilling, surgical precision of a veteran litigator. "Your Honor," Caleb began, sliding a thick, professionally bound folder across the polished mahogany. "The petitioners have painted a very compelling, tragic picture. However, their entire narrative is a fabricated smokescreen designed to execute a hostile financial takeover. We are submitting evidence of extreme coercion, premeditated fraud, and perjury." Caleb formally introduced the contents of envelope number 2 into the official court record. He unclipped the stack of printed emails and began to read aloud. He detailed the correspondence from 6 months ago, proving that my family had actively approached Evan while he was perfectly healthy. He exposed their aggressive attempts to force my husband into changing his primary beneficiaries and their morbid inquiries into evaluating my mental capacity in the hypothetical event of his death. The heavy silence in the courtroom shattered when Caleb read the final email in the chain, sent directly from Janine's personal account to her private wealth manager. "I quote directly from the petitioner," Caleb stated, his voice echoing sharply off the high ceiling. "She will listen to us and sign over the operational accounts if we scare her enough. We just need to isolate her first." The judge, an older man with sharp, discerning eyes, physically recoiled. He looked down at the highlighted document, then slowly shifted his gaze to my mother. The color completely drained from Janine's face. The mask of the grieving, desperate mother disintegrated instantly, revealing the cold, calculating predator hiding underneath. The motive was no longer a question of maternal protection. It was a documented, premeditated conspiracy for absolute control, before Janine's attorney could even formulate an objection. Caleb submitted the supplementary evidence gathered by the district attorney's office. He presented the digital forensics report, confirming that the draft guardianship petition had been typed and printed on my father's home network terminal 2 days prior to my supposed mental breakdown. He provided the intake logs from the private medical consulting firm, proving the capacity evaluation was booked under my name, but strictly tethered to Sloane's personal cell phone number to ensure I could never speak to the doctor directly. The judge removed his reading glasses and leaned heavily over the bench. He looked past the lawyers, past my glaring mother, and focused entirely on me. "Mrs. Coleman," the judge said softly, "the petitioners claim you are deeply confused and incapable of understanding basic financial and legal structures. Can you please tell this court exactly how your late husband's primary trust is currently organized?" I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my black dress. I did not cry. I looked the judge directly in the eye and delivered a flawless, unhesitating breakdown of my life. The primary assets are held in a revocable living trust, which transitioned to an irrevocable trust upon Evan's passing. I answered, my voice clear, resonant, and echoing with absolute authority. The portfolio includes commercial real estate holdings, a private equity share, and liquid corporate operating accounts. Furthermore, Your Honor, the trust contains a specific, triggered lockdown clause. The moment my family attempted to execute this fraudulent guardianship petition, all temporary access was automatically frozen and diverted to an independent state fiduciary. I authorized my attorney to trigger that exact clause yesterday morning to protect the estate from the people sitting across this aisle. I answered with the precision of a seasoned chief executive officer. I was articulate, completely grounded in reality, and terrifyingly well-informed. In 2 minutes of calm testimony, I completely obliterated 3 days of their intricate lies. Chaos erupted at the petitioner's table. My father, Dale, who had spent his entire life hiding behind my mother's aggressive shadow, suddenly panicked under the crushing weight of the perjury exposure. Caleb turned his attention to him, asking a simple, rapid-fire question about the timeline of their financial discussions. Dale completely broke character. He gripped the edge of the table, his face flushed red with sudden terror. "We just wanted to temporarily withhold her financial rights," Dale stammered loudly, his hands shaking. "Janine said we had to move fast before the banks locked us out. We talked about freezing her accounts right after the funeral. We did not want to hurt her. We just needed the capital secured." He had accidentally confessed in open court. He confirmed the timeline and the purely financial motive, entirely destroying their argument of a medical emergency. The judge's face turned scarlet with righteous fury. He struck his heavy wooden gavel against the sounding block with a violent crack that made Sloane flinch. "This petition is summarily dismissed with extreme prejudice," the judge bellowed, his voice filled with absolute disgust. "I am immediately referring this entire file, along with the petitioner's sworn testimonies, directly to the district attorney for a comprehensive criminal fraud investigation. We are adjourned." The courtroom erupted into a flurry of movement. Caleb placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. We had won. We had exposed the rot to the sunlight. But as I turned to gather my coat, I felt a familiar, chilling sensation crawling up my spine. I looked across the center aisle. Janine was not looking at her panicked lawyer, and she was not comforting my sobbing sister. She was staring directly at me. Her grand legal strategy had collapsed. Her public reputation was in ruins, and a criminal investigation was looming, but her eyes were completely devoid of surrender. She was a cornered animal, stripped of her elegant cage, and I knew instantly that she still held one final, reckless card in her hand. She intended to play it, no matter the cost. The courtroom door clicked shut behind us, but the air in the crowded corridor remained just as stifling. I walked toward the elevators, keeping my pace steady beside Caleb, when a hand violently clamped down on my forearm. It was my mother. Her perfectly styled hair was finally beginning to unravel at the edges, and her eyes were wide with a frantic, desperate energy. "If you walk away and let them do this to us," Janine hissed. Her voice a venomous, trembling whisper meant only for my ears, "you lose your family entirely. You will have absolutely no one left in this world." I stopped and looked down at her manicured fingers digging into the fabric of my dark coat, and then I looked up into her panicked eyes. For the very first time in 32 years, my heart did not race. My palms did not sweat. My voice did not shake. "Family is not a bargaining chip," I replied evenly. I reached over and gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my sleeve, dropping her hand back to her side, "and you cannot threaten me with the loss of something I never actually had." Behind her, the hallway suddenly erupted into a flurry of organized movement. Assistant District Attorney Rafael Ibarra stepped out of the courtroom, flanked by 3 county investigators wearing tactical vests over their dress shirts. He was already barking rapid, decisive orders into his phone. "I want immediate, total preservation orders sent to her private wealth advisor's firm downtown," Rafael commanded. Pointing to his lead investigator, "Seize all of their internal communications, freeze the notary public's digital ledgers, and flag every single suspicious transaction from the last 6 months. We are pulling this entire fraudulent network up by the roots today." 2 uniformed bailiffs detached from the wall and approached my mother and sister. The local press, having been tipped off by the sudden flurry of high-profile financial fraud warrants hitting the clerk's desk, had already gathered in a tight cluster near the security checkpoint by the main entrance downstairs, as the bailiffs formally detained Janine and Sloan, guiding them toward the glass-walled public elevators. The crushing reality of the situation finally hit my mother. The polished, untouchable suburban matriarch was being escorted out of a government building by law enforcement while camera shutters clicked wildly in the lobby below. It was her absolute worst nightmare brought to life. She was losing her flawless, carefully curated public reputation, stripped bare and humiliated for the entire city to witness on the evening news. A few feet away from the commotion, my father stood entirely frozen against the cold plaster wall. Dale watched his wife and his youngest daughter being led away into custody. His shoulders completely slumped inward. In that profound, heavy silence, I saw the exact moment the truth finally dawned on him, his lifelong commitment to looking the other way. His pathetic cowardice disguised as keeping the peace had directly paved the road for this exact devastation. His perpetual silence had simply given their malice a quiet place to grow. I walked out through the heavy revolving doors of the courthouse and stepped into the crisp, biting afternoon air. I found a quiet wooden bench near the courtyard fountain, sat down, and finally pulled the first envelope from my leather bag. I unfolded the thick paper and silently read the final paragraph of Evan's letter. "My dearest Mila," the dark ink read, "if they came to the cemetery to stand by you and say goodbye to me, I left instructions for Caleb to release a small financial gift to them as a token of my sincere gratitude. But if they left you alone in the freezing cold to face the dirt all by yourself, you will know exactly who they truly are." Caleb walked out of the building and sat beside me on the bench, handing me a final piece of documentation from his briefcase. It was the ultimate, brilliant twist in my husband's protective design. Evan had established a highly confidential, secondary financial vehicle called the 3 Doors Fund. It was a fail-safe mechanism built entirely around their predictable, insatiable greed. The capital inside this specific fund was designed to remain dormant unless a blood relative filed a fraudulent petition against my mental capacity. The moment my mother's lawyer stamped that emergency paperwork, the fund activated, releasing an ironclad legal defense budget designed to hire top-tier forensic accountants, private investigators, and security. The harder they attacked me, the more aggressively they tried to paint me as insane to steal the primary estate, the more legally and financially fortified I became. Evan had masterfully weaponized their own malicious intent to build an impenetrable, towering wall around my future. Late that evening, I returned to the immaculate suburban house one last time. It was completely empty now. The suffocating smell of lemon polish and artificial vanilla still hung heavy in the air. but the dark power the house held over me was entirely broken. I did not break a single dish in anger. I did not leave a dramatic, screaming note on the kitchen island. I simply walked upstairs, packed a single rolling suitcase with my essential clothes, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and walked straight out the front door. As the brass deadbolt clicked shut behind me, I felt an invisible, suffocating rope that had bound my lungs since childhood finally snap. 1 year later, I am standing on the sprawling wooden deck of a beautiful sunlit cabin nestled right against the edge of a massive, quiet lake. This was the exact spot Evan and I had purchased years ago, intending it to be our peaceful sanctuary. I did not move out here to hide from the world. I moved here to finally start living in it. 3 times a week, I open the heavy doors of the local community center in the nearby town. I host free, comprehensive legal literacy classes for vulnerable individuals, the elderly, the grieving widows, and anyone who feels intimidated or confused by dense legal paperwork. I teach them how to spot predatory clauses, how to secure their medical directives, and how to build their own fortresses out of paper and ink so their families cannot exploit them. I took the most traumatic, devastating week of my entire life and successfully forged it into a heavy shield for other people. The autumn wind is incredibly strong today. Whipping across the dark blue water and tangling my hair, I look out over the horizon, taking a deep breath of the cold, clean air. The 3 envelopes did not give me money. They gave me proof, boundaries, and freedom, and that is something they can never sign away from me again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Where are you listening from today? Please leave your city and local time in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.